As many of you know, in addition to the traditional Mount Sinai and Southern Sinai, there's been several possible candidates all over the Sinai Peninsula, also further north, also in recent years particularly, but something that actually started even in the 19th century, possibilities that it might be located in Arabia. And of course, Professor Anati's suggestion of Mount Karkom, Har Karkom, which is located just inside the southern border between Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, and Israel. Here you can see the plateau of Har Karkom. You can get an idea. We're talking about quite a high, flat plateau that's several kilometers long. If you look at the Google map on the right-hand side, you can see the parts of it are covered with quite a black hamada, which is something that you can see quite noticeably. For example, on Google Earth, you can actually pick it out that way when you can't see the actual outlines. The cliffs of Har Karkom are quite high, especially overlooking the eastern side, which is overlooking the Nahal Faran, Wadi Jirafi stream bed. Here we're looking down towards Nahal Karkom, which is coming off of the mountain. The top of the mountain, this is a photo, by the way, that I took, the larger photo. It's quite flat, but you also have two twin peaks, you could call them here. You can see on the summit. And from the summit, you can actually see quite far away. You can view Jebel Arif al-Naka from one looking towards the northwest. And if you look towards the northeast, northeast, you can actually see as far as Jebel Harun, which will be right below Jebel Shara, which would be the place of ancient seer. Here you can see the waterfall. This isn't very high resolution, but you can see the waterfall. There's actually two large streams that are coming off the top of the plateau. On the plateau itself, we also have vegetation. There's places there that you actually could come up and bring flocks of sheep to graze on in certain times of year, usually in the spring. When it floods out, you have floods coming down into Nahal Karkom, and they're running towards the Nahal Faran, going from the north, and also from Nahal Sagi going towards the south, also bending around the Karkom Plateau to reach Nahal Faran. I'm going to do this particular presentation with two parts. The first is considering the identification of Har Karkom as the original Mount Sinai, and I want to bring up the survival of the name El Faran, Paran. When you read it in English, it looks like El, Paran, but actually in Hebrew, it's Aleph Yud Lamed, and we're talking about a site, a name that has survived much later in history. Here you can see the original reference to it in Genesis 14, where it says El Paran. It's actually Ayel Paran, okay? And this is a site that we know as Aqaba, modern day Aqaba, but in ancient times was known as Ayla. It's something that's referred to by Pliny the Elder in the 1st century. We have references to it in the 2nd century. And even Eusebius of Caesarea in the 4th century, which is called Elam, Eilat. Today we call modern Eilat, which is on the opposite side of the Gulf. Even the Gulf of Aqaba is called the Elianic Gulf. And of course, in the Notitia Dignitatum, it's also called Ayla. And what's very interesting is that this name has even survived into modern times. In the Middle Ages, it's reported as being Ayla. And we also know from the 19th century that the Bedouins were even using the name Hale, which is what appears on the Pointinger map in the 4th century. The location of Paran seems to be very much connected with this particular Paran, which would be Aqaba or Ayla. We have, of course, roads that are going across that I'm going to be showing you in a minute. And I just want to bring up the point about the wilderness of Paran with regards to a reference in 1 Kings 11, where the prince of Edom is fleeing. He's fleeing from Edom, and he's going to Midian, which is interesting, by the way, because Midian seems to be a place that refugees go to. And this is something that Moses also ends up going and he's trying to get away from Pharaoh. And here we also have Hadad, who's running away from Edom. He's going from Midian to Paran, and from Paran across into Egypt. So very obviously, we're talking about a very direct route that's going across the northern Sinai Peninsula, the central and northern Sinai Peninsula, in order to reach Egypt. And of course, we're talking about roads. And when you notice that in Deuteronomy 25 Amalek, which is a war party, runs into the children of Israel in a place called Rephidim, which is very close to Mount Sinai. And this is something that we know that the roads are going through this part of the peninsula, and we're not talking about something so far south as the traditional Mount Sinai would infer. There's a very interesting route that Fawzi Zayedin, a friend of mine from Jordan, a very important archaeologist from Jordan, has wrote about several years ago. He mentions the Muhela route, which according to Shuher, who wrote this in 1916, claimed to be the invasion route, the invasion way of the Sinai from the east, that is coming from Mount Seir. And this is a road that goes down from Jebel Harun, past Jebel Harun, down to Naqab-Rubai. And Naqab-Rubai, it crosses the Wadi Araba into Nahal Hayun. And from Hayun, this route actually you can take, it goes very, very close to Mount Karkom, and it reaches up as far as Jebel Arif al-Naka. It can also connect to other roads and also access the Kadesh Barnea oasis. One of the important points here that he mentions is that in the early 20th century, a caravan from the École Biblique from Jerusalem actually traveled along this road. It went very close to a site called Manucha, Eina Mulecha. And Manucha is actually, we know this site, it's very close to Nahal Hayun on the Israeli side of the border. And this is something that we shall see here as well. A map of the governor of Sinai in the 20th century, this was published in 1940, is also using the Nahal Hayun. Here it's called Wadi Hayini. And they're passing through this and they're accessing the Rubai Pass, going past the foot of Jebel Harun, which is the place that's considered to be by Eusebius Horahar, the place, the tomb of Aaron, the high priest. This is something, a tradition that goes back at least 2,000 years there. What's interesting to note here is that along this way, the Hayun Valley on the Israeli side, we actually have surveys and material. Most of it's not published yet, but we actually have discovered, and I've actually seen myself, a rather large site from the Intermediate Bronze Age. It's sitting exactly on the point on the other side of on the banks of Hayun, going towards the Nahab-Rubai. And here, another point I want to make has to do with something that has been brought up and published already by our colleague Deborah Hearn, will be speaking later today. And that is the connection between Kuntilat Druj, which appears to be a pilgrim's caravanserai dating to around the 9th century BC. And it was an easy access from here to Har Karkom by way of Wadi Goraya. And here you can actually see, this is a map that she kindly loaned me. And of course, we know that there are people coming from the Northern Kingdom, and there's evidence of that in the site, the god where it talks about the god of Shomron, Siberia, and that kind of thing. And of course, we read in First Kings about Elijah coming into Horeb, the Mount of God. Horeb, of course, being another name of Mount Sinai. What I find very intriguing is the fact that one of the plaster fragments that were discovered years ago in Kuntilat Druj has actually a version of the Sinaitic theophany. And this is on plaster, the inscription number 4.2. And this talks about several things that we read in other parts of the Hebrew Bible, for example, but this is found on a piece of plaster, basically in the middle of nowhere, you could say, but within 20 miles or 20 kilometers of Mount Karkom. And so we have here earthquakes, El shining forth, again, earthquakes, the mountains melting, hills being crushed, ever-flowing waters, the Holy One, the deity gazing, this is mentioned more than once, and even a reference to the land of Kadesh, which we seem to be Kadesh Barnea, and also the day of war. This is something that also we're going to see in other parts of the Hebrew Bible. In the blessing of Moses, which some of you might know, we have in Deuteronomy 33. Yahweh comes from Sinai, he dawned from Seir, he beamed forth from Mount Paran. The Song of Deborah, one of the earliest, regarded as one of the earliest passages in the Hebrew Bible. Yahweh, when you set out from Seir, when you march from the steppe of Edom, the earth quaked, the heavens rained, the clouds rained water, the mountains shuddered. And of course, the theophany in Habakkuk, the book of Habakkuk, where it says also Eloha, which is Aramaic Elohim, came from Teman, from the south. Kadosh, the Holy One, from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, his splendor filled the earth, the radiance was like light. The ancient mountains crumbled, age-old hills collapsed. He stood and spanned the earth and scrutinized. The tents of Cushan quaked, and the tent curtains of the land of Midian. And of course, here we can see there's matching themes through all these theophanies. El, the gazing deity, the shining light, earthquakes, melting mountains, fire, flooding, the day of war, and shared locations as well. We have Kadesh, Sinai, Zaire, Mount Paran, Teman, which is south, and Midian. Teman, by the way, is something that's very much related to Edom as well. A very kind colleague of mine, David Eisenberg Dagan, was asked many years ago about the concentration of rock art on Har Karkom, which is something that this is the reason that Professor Anati discovered the mountain and came up with his suggestions. And one of the things she said is that and she published is that this kind of rock art is not unusual in southern Israel. However, if you look at the map that she herself published, you can see that the concentration is much further north. To find this kind of concentration here on a much southerly position in a place that there's no settlement as compared to the Negev highlands, this is unusual. And here you can see that there are themes, some of the themes that you see here, the men with upraised praying hands, the feet probably of a worshiper. These things we find at other sites, even also in Jordan, by the way, around the Petra area. But some of the themes seem to be quite unique. For example, the possibility of a map of the plateau that you see here in the center, something that appears to be possibly the Ten Commandments or something like that, or possibly a horned altar. And we also have these creatures, scorpions, snakes, a snake on some kind of staff, which reminds us of the Nehushtan, that produced later on the way north by Moses when he goes through the Arava Valley in the area of Punun. Another point, and I think this was brought up yesterday, was the whole issue of water from the rock that is in Horeb. And we have to take into account that the placement of Har Karkom, which is not a massif of granite. Here we actually have the conditions for something like this happening. We have underground aquifers and fault lines. And I have to tell you that I myself witnessed this phenomenon in 1995, November 1995. I drove down the Instance Road into the site of Wakhan Moor, which used to be called Moa. And you could see that the entire area was flooding out. It took me a few minutes to understand that the water in the pool here was actually coming, seeping in from around the pool. This overflow event took place for well over a year. There was actually, even months later, there was water flowing in the desert through here. It was quite unusual. But it's something that we also know from biblical references, and not only with regards to Mount Sinai, is a possibility. And we're talking about an earthquake that's over 200 kilometers away, but it's pushing the water table up, as we can see here. Another thing that I want to make a special note about, this is one of my special things. I'm very interested in the use of Arabic in looking up names, particular place names that we have, for example, related to the Exodus Sojourn. I think it's a neglected resource, and it's something that researchers should pay more attention to. I do not have the time to go into this. I hopefully in the article they plan to write, then I'll be able to include some of these things. Other points to consider regarding the identification and also the dating of the material remains of the Israelite sojourn. And this is something that came up in the questioning that Professor Nati answered a few minutes ago. I want to make a point of something quite unusual. We have 3 researchers, and thankfully Professor Nati is still with us. These researchers, Professor Manuel Nati, the late Rudolf Cohen, and also the late David Alon, these men, all 3 of these men had probably the most experience in the Negev. And David Alon was working as Tom Well, a good friend of Tom Levy's, and he was working with him more in the area of the western Negev to the northwestern Negev around Beersheba and that area. Rudolf Cohen was working all over the Negev. He also excavated in North Sinai in Kudirat. They had tremendous finds and tremendous experience, and all 3 of them basically came up with the same ideas. independently. And I have to make a point of this. These are not religious men that I know of. I know that David alone was a kibbutznik. They were not searching to prove anything about the Exodus, but what they found brought them pretty much to the same conclusions. And one of the things that they noticed is something that's already been dealt with, and it's been spoken about already here today, is the paucity of anything of the Middle and Late Bronze Age. And when I say Middle Bronze Age here, I don't mean the MB1, the Middle Bronze Age 1. I'm talking about MB2 and Late Bronze Age. We see this throughout the Negev survey, okay, that we had many years ago. And also in the Karkom survey, Professor Nati surveyed 2 map surveys. We're talking about each map survey is 100 square kilometers. The Negev Highlands Emergency Survey, which was actually carried out by a number of people, such as Gidon Avni, Rudolf Cohen, Moti Hyman, Shaike Linder, Steve Rosen. And once again, we're seeing a total blank here in this time period. If we go to Kadesh Barnea, the area of En Kudirat and En Kadis, we also see here the same situation. We have Middle Bronze Age 1, which is considered the same as Intermediate Bronze Age today. It's just another name. We have no MB2, no Late Bronze Age. One of the things that happened close to the time that he passed away, David alone had published a small booklet in Hebrew called New Light on the Exodus from Egypt. And here he writes something quite interesting. He says, throughout Sinai and the Negev, from the southeastern part of the Beersheba Valley, Nahal Gra, Nahal Psor, there were no settlements in existence in the period between 1800 and 1100 BCE, including Kadesh Barnea, which was the most important station to and from Egypt. And then he gives the list of the things that happened from there. And he said it was from Kadesh that the children of Israel went around the land of Edom, yet it was uninhabited in the 19th to 11th centuries BCE and was neither a permanent or temporary settlement. And this is exactly the case, as I mentioned earlier, was found by other surveyors. I should mention as well, if we're not just talking about the Negev in North Sinai, we're also talking about even in southern Jordan. I happen to be part of the team from Brown University that had to survey a 3-year survey of the area of Beta north of Petra. And I worked on the pottery. The same here. We have early Bronze Age, and then we have a hiatus until we get to the Iron Age period. What was found throughout this area, and here for those of you that are not familiar, but I think most of the researchers are familiar, that we're talking about one period with 3 names: Middle Bronze Age 1, which is the same as Early Bronze Age 4, which is the same as Intermediate Bronze Age, more or less. There might be a few nuances, but here we're talking about the same time period. And this we have quite a lot of, as Rudolph uncovered and other people surveyed, for example, here Moti Hyman in the Negev Highlands and also in North Sinai. And in fact, I myself, together with my colleague Benjamin Seidel, excavated a site called Rogem Berotaim on the western border. Here we actually found something of the same kind of structures that were found throughout the Negev, these small round structures that had some kind of support in the middle. We actually found a layer. You can see here a layer of ash, a very slight layer of ash. And what we found when this was actually, the ash was examined in the laboratories of Cambridge University. And what we found was that this was not an ash layer on the floor. This was actually some kind of roofing of branches and tree branches and that kind of thing that had been placed overhead. And of course, here you can see the rather well-known site of Beer Sisim, which is considered MB1, or we call it today Intermediate Bronze Age. And we have notable features that were also noted by Rudolf Cohen himself. These booth-style dwellings, they're commemorated in the Feast of Tabernacles. Jews even today yearly build these kind of things to remember this time period, this kind of dwelling. The ephemeral settlements, devoid of cultic shrines or objects in these settlements, a lack of sickle blades and specialization in producing stone tools. These sickle blades would have been used for agriculture, but we don't seem to have that much of it. Preponderance of copper weapons, particularly in tumuli burials, and tumuli burials placed up and away from dwellings to avoid ritual impurity, as we could see from the biblical accounts. So we have something very different here. Rudolf Cohen actually published something that's been quite ignored, I would say, over the years. And I'm going to quote here: the similarity between the course of the MB1 migration and the route of the Exodus seems too close to be coincidental. and a comparable process may have operated here. The Late Bronze Age, the period usually associated with the Israelites' flight from Egypt, is archaeologically unattested in Kadesh Barnea. This is exactly what David Alon had mentioned, but MB1 remains abound and seem to provide a concrete background for the traditions of settlement. Whether the Israelites' trek from Egypt actually occurred in this period or was based on a dim memory, and here I have to mention, if it's a dim memory, it's one of the most detailed memories that I've ever heard of. I can't think of anything as detailed as what we have in the Exodus tradition. Or a dim memory of an earlier migration and conquest along this route cannot yet be determined with certainty. He also mentions a very important fact, which is that it appears that the sedentarization of the Central Negev and the Middle Bronze was short-lived, subsisting of only one generation. This is something that I also saw in the excavations that we did. This is something that's going on and on. We're not talking about sites that were reused and reused over and over again. I should also mention that Rudolph reported, and it's been found since, including in the excavation I was involved in, remains of the early Bronze Age underneath or part in the earliest, let's say, overlying the floor or the bedrock of many of these structures. And that's also begging the question, how can that be? If there's so much time between the MB1 period, the intermediate Bronze Age period, and the earlier EB period, even if it's the EB3 period, how can that be explained? And it's not explained. Anati, of course, has already gave his lecture, and I don't want it to go into everything, but he also mentions that the most difficult hurdle he had was the actual chronology of the Exodus, and he explained just a few minutes ago how he understands that. And David Alon also went back, and he actually summarized the arguments concerning the 4 possible time periods discussed regarding the Exodus. Of course, the first one would be the mid-12th century, the second, the 13th century, the BCE, the third would be the 15th century BCE, and the fourth, according to him, the 21st century BCE, which in his opinion was the most appropriate date. Here we have a situation in which we have archaeological remains lacking historical context in the early Bronze and the intermediate Bronze Age. On the other hand, we also have historical context lacking archaeological remains on the Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age. I think that one of the problems that has arisen here, we're talking about what we could call tell-archaeology, which is the basis of the chronology that we use today, versus a higher resolution that we usually have in arid zone archaeology. And in 1922, for those of you who know or if you don't know, the first real chronological classification was published, and this was published by 4 representatives, 2 of them British, Garstang and Pythian Adams. We also have Hugh Vincent from the École Biblique, and of course, William Foxworth Albright. Many people looking at this has been published by many in recent years. It's been published also in the Oxford Handbook as being something that was just basically changing the names. In Bronze Age, early Canaanite, they're changing the names, but it's not just the names. Albright actually put in play for the first time a chronology here. But notice that for the early Bronze Age, and here I would say it includes the intermediate Bronze Age, he doesn't have anything yet set in stone. It's something that's earlier than 2000 BC. I want you to understand, for those who know, I know there's some, this is published by Professor Finkelstein, and I'm sure many of you know this, but for those who do not know, you should realize that the chronology that we have, the chronology of all this, of the early and intermediate Bronze Age, is not set in stone. It's actually in play, and it's been changing. If it was originally considered to be around 1900 BC or 2000, today that date has been raised up to 2500 BC. If the early Bronze Age is considered to start between 3800, 3600 BC, it actually started at a lower date, was considered to be lower. And today, other researchers are also believe that should be lowered. Here you have a very nice graph that was published by Regev and Finkelstein, in which you can see this, and you can also see with the tells, with Tel Yarmut, for example, Megiddo, and you also have the correlations with the Egyptian chronology that were spoken about earlier. And of course, in the yellow, you have the intermediate Bronze Age, EB4, or Middle Bronze Age 1. And what I'm trying to say here is that that this being in play, we're talking about hundreds of years that are going back and forth. The sequence we know that early Bronze Age 1 comes before early Bronze Age 2 and before early Bronze Age 4, intermediate Bronze Age. But fitting all that is not that simple. And the question is, do we accept this? Do we say, okay, it's all in stone, we can't change this? I'm asking if this is not an anomaly. All the things that we've talked about here today, it's not an anomaly that should be investigated further. In my opinion, I think that although science very occasionally has a paradigm changes or transitions, I don't think this has ever happened in archaeology. Nobody questions these things, but we have data. We actually have a lot of data by a lot of different people, and much of it unbiased. I would say the majority of it unbiased. And the question is, shouldn't we look back into this? Maybe we have it wrong. Maybe the base of what we have is wrong. And here we're not talking again about thousands of years. This is on a geological timescale. We can change. You go back into prehistory, you can add 1,000 years, you can delete 1,000 years. Here we're talking about a few hundred years. And I think it's something that needs to be reinvestigated. And I think that we have to be much more open-minded about it. And I know it's something that quite a lot of you that are listening to me right now will totally object to. But I'm a field archaeologist. I'm a dirt archaeologist. I work in this area for over 30 years. I see what has been seen. They were correct. And there's a problem here. And I think it's something that needs to be addressed. And if we go to some of the newer things, we're talking about radiocarbon date. Please don't think that radiocarbon dating is actually providing any of the answers, I would say, or all the answers. For one thing, you can say here, this is by Johanna Regev. She does a beautiful job working on all these kind of things. But she says, for example, the relatively large transition, she's talking about the transition from the EB1A to the 1B, could be due to overlapping periods or subperiods defined by scholars, which clouds the issue and makes the data unreliable as to what they represent, okay? And she also, down below, also says, she notes that our models were performed using chronological classifications as given by the excavators. And I want you to understand that this is what's been happening all along. And this is something that I think that we can open this question. I think it should be discussed. I don't think it's a sin, an academic sin or otherwise, or religious sin to actually ask these questions and to look back into things. And I want to thank the organizers and everyone who took time to listen to this. These are some of the finds that I excavated in 2011 from an intermediate Bronze Age to actually graves along the western border. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tali.